No, Eli, I'm not going to give it to you today. Fussed at me last week. But there's a guest storyteller, Professor Joe's going to come up and tell us a story. Whenever he's ready, he's adorning himself. Come on, Professor Joe.
I wasn't told that there was a story that went with it. There's always a story.
Come on up.
Well, there is a story. Back by popular demand, let's start at the beginning. Kathy and I had a really good time at VBS. We had a great time at VBS with the kids, teaching them some science experiments and a couple of magic tricks at the same time. The story is, somebody missed the performance on Friday night that we did with the parents and the kids, the closing ceremonies. Someone happened to miss it, and they told me flat out after they found out about it, you are going to do one of them again because I missed it. Miss Michelle, unfortunately, had an emergency paperwork situation on Friday after Friday night, so she had to be in the fellowship hall, so she missed it. So she told me, she said, you are going to do one again for me. That's all I got. So, this is the one that we did, and Kathy and I did it the first time on Friday night.
We got sued, Joe.
No, I'm just kidding.
He didn't want you to shoot football.
All we did was take a hard-boiled egg, a couple of candles.
You need to tell the story, Kitty.
I'm making up a story.
That works. That works. Keep
The
going.
egg is you, and the light, and you know, you have that song, This Little Light of Mine. Well, Jesus is the light. And this is what happens, is when you take Jesus in your life, He shines a light in you. And sometimes we go through difficult things in life, but as long as Jesus is with us,
The water is not part of the trip.
as long as Jesus is with us, no matter what He puts us through, He's going to see us through it.
Now get it out.
That's an entirely different trick.
He makes impossible things happen.
He does.
Right.
He does.
It's not magic. It's all about science, and all it's all about science is all about God and everything He does for us and our surroundings.
Amen.
Do we have a children's play that talk about this?
Sure.
Then we Heavenly Father, thank you for being in our lives always and always, Lord. Thank you for seeing us through difficult times that we do go through. Heavenly Father, thank you for your grace. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, I'm going to need your help. Since it's Father's Day, on Mother's Day we gave all the ladies something, so we have to give all the guys something on Father's Day. So if you're a guy, I don't know who's a father and who's not a father, so we're all fathers today. You're tired? Son, I'm tired.
Then you'll be tired.
Okay, come on guys. Start on this row here with Mr. Lex and Mr. Bob, and just work your way down.
Future fathers. Future fathers.
Yeah, Justin's not a father.
He's a guy.
Come on, guys.
And say Happy Father's Day enthusiastically. What's that word?
Enthusiastically.
Thank you. All right, Rob, we'll start another second.
I think we got Mr. Joe and Hollis.
Jump in there.
Mr. Joe and You already got that here. What? Yeah, right there. Eli? Come get daddy one.
Did everybody get one? Jimmy did.
How did you leave Jimmy out? I thought y'all weren't gonna get me a new car.
That's right.
Yeah, just add water.
Everybody got one? Happy Father's Day, everybody.
It's a rough walk. I know. Give him 30 years.
Okay. This morning, we're going to talk about the fear of God. I think it's something that we kind of don't have as much of anymore as we used to. So we're going to talk about the fear of God. Danger. First of all, we're going to talk about the danger that's in the water. That's the point of the text today, the point of this message. And it's something that we can all, I think, understand in one way or another, danger in the water. But on the other hand, there's a beautiful thing about water. There's beauty in the water as well. There's an appeal to water. There's something about water that draws us, something that moves within us. Especially at this time of the year when we're all kind of prepared for maybe a little getaway or a vacation down to the lake or to the beach, as we lay our towels out and sunbathe and watch the waves as they come up and splash against our ankles, or maybe we head away for that mountain getaway and we grab a canoe and set sail on a crystal clear, still lake, and we just marvel at the quietness of our surroundings. Or we take our fly rod and we go fly fishing in a stream that's moving quickly with rapids as they go over the rocks. There's beauty. There is beauty in the water. Even water, as we look at maybe our swimming pools, if you have one in your backyard, and you look at the crystal clear that's set off by patio furniture and potted plants, there's something that's mesmerizing about water. Almost any kind of water will do. The water that comes from a gentle summer rain as we sit under a covered porch and watch the drops as they fall from the sky and as they nourish the earth. There's beauty in the water as it freshens our spirits, answers a longing we have, and touches some primal need deep within us. But for all the beauty that we have in the water, that we associate with the water, there's also a fear that we must have. There's danger in the water. I mean, after all, that's why we build fences around our swimming pools. That's why we put life jackets on our boats. That's why we teach our children to swim. That's why our hearts ache when we hear someone drowning or someone caught in a flash flood with no escape. There's fear. There's something dangerous in the water. And we can understand the fear of those disciples when we hear once again this familiar story about them being in the boat with Jesus. Fear, after all, is the key element of this story. These disciples came across the storm. They were afraid of the storm because it came from familiar territory to unfamiliar territory. And they knew something about the danger of the water. After all, they were fishermen. And the danger of what can happen in a storm that pops up, capsizing, being overwhelmed by wind and waves, or drowning. We know the story backwards and forwards. So we're sure in our reading of the story that it's the danger of the water that they fear, right? And because this is a Bible story and we're listening to it this morning in form of a message, a sermon, you know how to spiritualize this danger and the water, how to turn this danger into a metaphor that we can associate with our lives. After all, we've heard it 100 times. So off we go to apply this lesson to all the things about life that we fear. And we look at it as those disciples looked at it, with fear in their eyes. And we relate to that fear as we associate it with our own personal storms that surround us. The storms of life, the things we face each and every day. The storms of history. Those things we live through. Those things we fear each and every day in our own lives. And we deal with those storms by recalling the words from this text as Jesus tells us, have you still no faith? Have you still no faith? And we take that rebuke of Jesus and we fuss at ourselves for having a lack of faith, having not enough faith. Because Christ is on board with us. And He wakes up in time to calm the storm. And since we think we know this story so well, we tell ourselves that if we have enough faith, everything will be okay. We'll overcome the danger and the fear of the water. I mean, after all, in today's society, today's culture, fear is something that we're supposed to overcome. We're not supposed to have fear. Fear is something that we can get help with. We can get help with fear of the dark, fear of elevators, fear of crowds, fear of spiders, fear of whatever, and fear of the water as well. We can get help with that. So we tell ourselves, let's just overcome this fear. And we do that by having more faith. Because when Christ is on board with us, there might be the wind and the waves and the threatening danger of the storm and the spray that hits us in the face. But there's no danger in the water. At least in the way that we most commonly interpret this story. Because we're so sure of what it's saying to us that we cleanse this story of all its fear and all of its terror. But if we look at it a little bit closer through a different lens, the fear is supposed to be there. The terror is supposed to be there. And I've decided that to approach the text in the way that it usually is actually to be afraid of the wrong thing. Because it's not the storm that blows up, that pops up suddenly on the sea that they're afraid of. Because they're fishermen, they know the dangers, they know the risk. They've been out there 1,000,000 times and faced these storms. It's not the storms that causes those disciples to fear. That's not the real danger. Do you know what the real danger of the water is? The real danger of the water is Jesus Christ Himself. Now stay with me for just a second, because look what happens in this text. He travels with those disciples out to a sea where a storm pops up in the middle. He wakes up and He takes care of it. And then they become afraid. They're not half as afraid of the storm as they are of Christ when He gets up and He calms the storm. They're afraid of His power. That's what they're afraid of. That's the real danger of the water. Because they say, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey His command? They sense something about His power that's dangerous, that's frightening. Because if Jesus could do what He did with this storm, they're thinking, what is He going to do with us? What does He have in mind to do with us? It's an important question. It's one that we ought to consider. It's one that we should ask ourselves all the time and pay closer attention to. Who is this man who can calm the wind and the waves? More often than not, we observe people in the world who, when given the opportunity to embrace faith, they turn it down. And we tend to fuss at them and say, well, why don't you have enough faith? Why don't you believe enough in God's power? If you only had enough faith, we say. If you only weren't so afraid, we say. But maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe their reluctance, at least partially, is not based on so much of how little they acknowledge the power of God, but on how much they fear the power of God. Maybe it's an overwhelming sense of awe that thinking, if I get myself into this, I'm not sure I can get out. Maybe it's a respect for, an acknowledgement of, an understanding of the utter and sheer power of God that makes them so reluctant. And why wouldn't it be, if you think about it, with that kind of power? With that kind of a power that a man can get up and turn a storm inside and out. Who wants to be turned inside out? This is the kind of power that makes people tremble down to their bones. No matter how seaworthy the boat that they're in happens to be. Who is it that even the wind and the sea obey him? That's an important question to ask. And maybe it's us that we just don't get it when we preach about it or when we behave in a way as if one of the side effects of faith is not having enough fear of the power of God. Because we encounter people all the time who speak of their faith in God with blessed assurance, who speak of such a cozy and wonderful relationship with the Lord Almighty. They walk with Him, they talk with Him, they seek His advice on what house to buy, who to marry, where to work, where to turn at this intersection, who to hire for a babysitter. Everything has to do with their relationship with the Lord, as if they're walking around all day long taking selfies with God Himself. And it's great. It's a wonderful thing to hear them talk about it. It's every dimension of intimacy imaginable, except fear, except distance. And there's something about having distance and fear. It's not a lack of faith. In fact, it's the opposite. It's an overwhelming amount of faith when you recognize it. And that's what those disciples knew in that boat. They pondered their presence with Him. And they were afraid because of His almighty power. Because more often than not, it's frightening to be on the scene when God is on the scene. And what kind of person would you be if you were suddenly overcome, no longer afraid of the power of God? What kind of person would you be? The well-known author and famous preacher Fred Craddock tells a story of a pastor he knew who went to visit one of his parishioners in the hospital. And this woman was suffering with a terrible disease, a terminal disease. And the pastor went in knowing that he would give one of those prayers that acknowledges the desperation of the situation, but likely would not really have any effect of change on it whatsoever. We know prayers like that. They're honest, they're pastorally sensitive, if you will, and they're appropriate prayers to pray in these type of situations. So he went to the hospital room and prepared himself to give this kind of prayer. But the woman instead insisted that he prayed to God to heal her, to heal her. And so against his better judgment, he prayed fervently. And afterwards, when he left, he got to thinking about it, and he came back a few days later for another visit. And this time that woman was sitting up in bed. The wires had been disconnected. The tubes has been removed. The curtains were open, and she said to him with a smile on his face, "You know what? The few days ago, the doctors noticed something different. And they decided to run a few more tests. They decided to do a few more x-rays. And there was no sign of that tumor whatsoever. And I'm going home. The power of God. The fear of God. There's something about the power of God that ought to make us have fear because it's so unmanageable. It's so unpredictable. And there's reasons to fear the power of God. The same reasons those Israelites had in the wilderness when they told Moses, you go up on that mountain because God is up there and I'm scared. What kind of person would you be if you had overcome the fear of God? It's something that we shouldn't do. And I believe that's what those disciples knew in that boat. Looking eyeball to eyeball at the danger that was in the water. Jesus Christ, the mysterious one. The demanding one. The disturbing one. Has done the most unlikely thing with that storm. And they were thinking, what unlikely thing is he going to do with us? We ask ourselves that same question today. What unlikely thing is Jesus Christ desiring to do with us? Because he is who he is. He does what he does. He demands what he demands. And there's danger and fear. We look at water as so pure and innocent. Even in baptism, as we see water being cupped in the pastor's hand and splashed over the head of whoever. And we think it's so innocent and so pure and so wonderful. Until we realize that we're being shaped by that water. We're being formed by that water. And we start to live under the terrifying challenge of what that water represents. C.S. Lewis wrote that letting that fearsome mystery of your life or into your life is something like getting your house redone. But according to God's will, because he's going to do it extravagantly and wildly. Not just a small change, but he's going to add a floor. He's going to add 2 floors. He's going to add a wing here. He's going to add a wing there. He's going to add a magnificent doorway. Windows. You thought it was going to be a small change, just a minor addition. But God's plan is to build a palace where you can come in and dwell and live. No wonder those disciples were so afraid on that boat. In the presence of that kind of God, who wouldn't be afraid? What's safe? Same thing as the church. It's a respectable institution making productive contributions to society, hopefully. The church, as we know here, is like a family who come together, who love each other. But for God's sake, let's not underestimate the church as a vessel that contains a terrifying presence, that contains frightening power, power to be able to transform people, power to make each of us something that we had figured there was no way we could be, that we didn't know we could be. Realizing that there's something that we may not know how to get out of. It's the power to redeem, true, but it's terrifying, frightening all the same. And as we take our positions, steering or crewing this vessel that is the church, for God's sake, for the love of God, don't forget about the danger in the water. Let's not underestimate the power of God. Let us not underestimate the fear of God, but instead to call on him to harness that within us so we can do and live in a way that is pleasing in what he demands of us to do. The fear of God. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we again thank you for this day that you've given to us and the message that you have delivered. And Lord, help us not to forget the power that you have, the power that you have given to us as we call on the Holy Spirit within our lives. Father, help us to use that power in all that we do. Help us to fear that power. to embrace it, to harness it. Father God, we just thank you for all that you're going to do in our lives when we call on you for help. Now go with us as we leave this place. Lead us and guide us in every step we take. In Christ's name we pray.